as a brand owner, how do I go about getting in stores? So the easiest way to do it is to find out the contacts of buyers, tell them about your clothing, and if you want to do one extra, have a showroom, especially in somewhere like Paris. So the quickest way to do it is organize whatever you can afford, kind of like a little showroom in Paris, because during Paris Fashion Week, everyone is in Paris for the most part. All the buyers are there, the journalists are there, all that sort of stuff. So you set up a showroom in Paris, you set appointments with buyers, and you try to convince them to come to your showroom, and then you just pitch to them. That would be like the quickest and easiest way to get into stores. Because yeah, if buyers have time, if you are able to convince them enough, then they could come to your showroom, and before you know it, they're buying your clothes. So it just depends. But that would be the easiest, quickest way to do it. It's not cheap, but you know, you have to invest in your brand, I guess. Let's see. I'm trying to get my brand's graphic shirts into a small local boutique. It's something I'd like to continue doing while also working on my online presence. Is that a bad idea to get into stores? I think it just depends on you. I mean, if I had a brand, who knows? I might have a brand one day, who knows? But when I do have a brand, or if I have a brand or whatever, me personally, I just want to be direct to consumer. I don't really, and it becomes your goals once again. If I had a brand, I don't care about making a brand $1 billion brand. I'm not LVMH. So I don't mind everything being a small operation and everything being in-house and stuff like that. So for me personally, I want to be direct to consumer, because when you're in stores, if you're a big company and you're a big brand, fine, it's favorable, it's in your favor. If you're a small brand, the way the deals look to stock in stores is horrible. The like sale return contracts, they are terrible. Which essentially, if you guys don't know what that means, when you're a new brand, they don't know if your stuff will sell. So they normally do things like, okay, we'll accept your clothing, but if it doesn't sell, then contractually we can sell it back to you for the same price. So just because you've sold it to the store doesn't actually mean you've sold it, because at any point in time, they can be like, well, it's not selling, so give us our money back. So it's just, so why would I want to stress myself with that? The only time I would ever stock in a store if I had a brand is if I had all the leverage and I was a big brand and everything was on my terms. So the terms were favorable to me. Otherwise, there's no reason why I would stock in a store, to be honest. The only other reason people stock in stores is, actually there's two other reasons. It's to achieve more visibility and branding, because the everyday customer, sometimes how they perceive your brand changes depending on where your brand is. So if your brand is stocked in Harrods and in Selfridges, there's a certain consumer that will start to see your brand as more luxury just because it's in those spaces. So that's one reason. And another reason is, if you don't have any retail space or you don't have a showroom that people can visit, then it's a way for people to get familiar with your clothing and be able to have an outlet to try things on. So even though a lot of brands know, okay, these contracts aren't favorable in terms of if it doesn't sell, they're literally just going to get their money back. They see the positives in the branding that comes with stocking in certain places, and they see the positives in people being able to try the stuff on. Now, me personally, I still wouldn't care. I'm not doing that. Me personally, I'm not doing that. But then it's a bit different for me because I have an audience. So normally as a designer, the advice is normally build an audience first, because then you have an audience that understands what you're trying to achieve and what you're trying to do, and you don't have to start begging stores. So I think it just depends what your circumstances. But me personally, I wouldn't, especially as a new brand, stock in any store. That's just a recipe for disaster. This is also very true too, because sometimes as a newer brand, you don't have a lot of control over how your clothing is being presented in the store. So yeah, it's so many reasons I wouldn't. Do you think it's impossible to grow a brand without seeding product? No, you don't have to seed product to grow a brand. It helps, but you don't have to. I also think, once again, it depends on your audience. Like someone like Sanjeev, because I'm using Sanjeev as an example because he has a brand and he has an audience. Someone like Sanjeev is in a position where he has such a big audience, he doesn't need to give anyone product. Like he does, but he doesn't need to because he has his own audience already. If you're a brand that has no audience, then yes, you kind of do need to seed product, because how else are people going to see your clothing? Like, if we're being objective, if you don't have a big social media, so people aren't seeing your clothing on social media and people aren't finding about your clothing anywhere else, the only plausible way to get traction to your brand is to seed it to people that will talk about the brand. It's marketing, right? So I wouldn't say it's impossible. It just depends on the circumstance. Is that how some stock from brands end up at TK Maxx? Oh yeah. So to give you an example, I worked for a luxury brand one time, and our collection, one specific collection, didn't sell, and there was limited warehouse space. So because there was limited warehouse space, it was costing us, because this is also something I think people don't realize unless you work in fashion. Warehouse space is so expensive. Like, storage is so expensive. It costs brands so much money storing clothes, so much money. And also how much money it costs organizing things in a warehouse and keeping tabs on everything in a warehouse is really expensive too. So having excess clothes is actually really expensive, because once your warehouses are full, you either have to, put these clothes in TK Maxx and cut your losses and get rid of those clothes, or you have to invest in even more storage, which is so expensive that most brands are just like, no, that doesn't make financial sense. So that is how stuff ends up in TK Maxx. So in the case of this brand I worked at, the collection didn't sell. All our warehouses were full, so we didn't have anywhere to put these clothes. And if we were to invest in more storage, it would cost more money than the clothing even cost to produce. So it didn't make sense. So we decided as a team to cut our losses and to sell to TK Maxx for like insanely cheap prices. But it was, at least we can get some money, and it's a lot better than if we had to invest in more storage and more warehouse space. So it just made financial sense at the time in terms of what's the best bad option. And TK Maxx was the best bad option. So yeah, that is how stock from brands end up at TK Maxx. When stuff isn't selling and there's nowhere to put the clothing, and it could be more expensive to put these things in storage or whatever, or brands are just trying to get any kind of like quick money to start working on a new collection, those are normally the reasons why stock ends up in TK Maxx. TK Maxx comes in, they're like, we've got money for you. We can buy each piece at, $5 a piece. The amount of money that TK Maxx is such a good business model, by the way. The amount of money they buy these quote unquote expensive garments for, you would be so shocked. Like, garments that, like, I feel like I'm unveiling the industry, but garments that literally retail for $400, $500, TJ Maxx will literally buy that shit for $5 and then sell it for like 90, 100. And then obviously consumers are like, oh my God, it's a bargain. We're saving $400. But TK Maxx is making a killing on those garments. They bought that stuff for pittance. Like that TK Maxx business model is, I have to clap it up. That business model is fantastic. This YouTube channel runs on your support. If you want to support the channel, you can subscribe to my Patreon. You'll gain access to exclusive content that includes everything from my Patreon podcast, where I give a behind-the-scenes insight into the fashion industry, as well as a fashion book club, where I review my favorite fashion books. You can also check out my fashion ebook, which highlights the best fashion journalists to follow, definitions of common fashion terminology, and how to determine what a good source of fashion information is. The links to everything are in the description below.